Hello! On January 10th, 2020, the internet was shaken by a gruesome video capturing the last breaths of Katrina, a notorious cartel assassin. She had once confidently flaunted her weapons and curves on social media, but misfortune struck when her hideout was attacked by enemies. This is the story of the female drug lords who dared to face evil. On February 18th, 2011 de Tauno, Ciudad Pedro de Alvarado, Guatemala was buzzing with excitement and anticipation for the upcoming local election. In a cozy hotel, Myra, a mayoral candidate, was enjoying lunch with her loyal supporters. However, none of them knew that death was lurking outside. Suddenly, two armored trucks pulled up in front of the hotel. A group of masked men stormed in armed with rifles and opened fire on the panicked diners. Blood splattered. Screams of terror echoed through the air, and 8 people lay dead, including Myra. This was not the first time Myra had been targeted for assassination. In June 2006, while she and her family were returning home, gunmen ambushed their car. Myra survived with minor injuries, but her niece paid the price with her life right before her eyes. Who wanted Myra dead and why? The answer was simple. Myra was a notorious drug queenpin, one of the queens of Guatemala's underworld. With cruelty and violence, she ruled her drug empire with an iron fist, deciding who would live and who would die. The townspeople lived in fear of her name, as her ruthlessness knew no bounds. Rumor had it that Myra had killed her own husband and buried his body in a desolate area, but his remains were never found, and she was never suspected in his disappearance. But that wasn't the end of her reign of terror. Myra had the entire city and police force in her grip with ambitions to conquer the entire country. No one dared to challenge her authority. Except for one. Myra's only remaining political rival was Roberto Marroquin Fuentes, the leader of a competing criminal gang. He thirsted for control of the drug market, and to achieve that, Myra and her family had to be eliminated. When Myra was killed, Roberto became the prime suspect, but he had a solid alibi, claiming he wasn't at the scene when the massacre occurred. Myra's sister, Myra, refused to believe it. She was determined to avenge her sister's death. Myra was no less formidable than Myra. She inherited her sister's drug empire and harbored a burning hatred. Myra made 3 failed assassination attempts on Roberto, yet each time he miraculously escaped death. Whether it was luck or heavy protection, or both, he managed to survive. Before she could attempt a 4th assassination, Myra was arrested and thrown into prison. Even behind bars, the flames of vengeance still burned within her. She escaped twice, each time leaving Roberto in a state of fear. After her second escape, she was transferred to a high-security military prison. However, rumors persist that Myra is still plotting, waiting for the perfect opportunity to break free once again to finally exact her revenge for her beloved sister. Myra, as the ghosts of the past return, what fate awaits them? The story isn't over yet, and the blood-soaked paths are still waiting for the tireless footsteps of Myra. The invincible assassin Laala, a famous name in Mexico's underworld, is known as a fearless heat woman, always challenging death at every turn. She didn't serve just one, but 2 ruthless gangs, La Nueva Familia Michoacana and Los Viagras. With her alluring appearance and sharp intelligence, Laala built a fearsome reputation not only for her killing abilities, but also for her recklessness and lack of mercy. Wherever Laala appeared, danger followed. However, her bold social media posts and YouTube videos became the double-edged sword that ultimately sealed her fate. In one file, she was known as Lucy Cruz. In another, Castillo Hernandez. She used social media to flaunt her accomplishments, mock her enemies, and challenge even the most powerful criminals. Laala didn't hesitate to post videos and photos of herself with guns, money, and drugs. She even went so far as to insult El Menco, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, a man notorious for his brutal violence and ties to thousands of murders. He had once been a police officer before becoming one of the most wanted criminals in both Mexico and the U.S., surpassing even Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Simply put, El Mencho was not someone anyone wanted to provoke. But Laala didn't care. She truly believed she was untouchable, even feeling invincible. However, it wasn't long before that arrogance led her to a fatal mistake. In November 2020, she posted a video where she criticized CJNG, calling them cowards for abandoning a truck loaded with weapons. In the video, she relentlessly mocked, taunted, and provoked El Mencho. That was the moment when her boldness would cost her everything. Shortly after, Laala disappeared without a trace, and no one knew what had happened to her. Some rumors claimed she had been kidnapped and tortured by CJNG, while others suspected she had been killed, her body dumped in a mass grave. There were even claims that Laala was still alive, hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike back. But one thing was certain: when you dare to challenge El Mencho, you don't meet a good end. And with all her arrogance, Laala may have lost her chance at survival without even realizing it. This brutal game wasn't just about survival, it was an unimaginable war, where boldness and ambition could lead to death in the blink of an eye. Would she return and face her enemies, or would she remain just a memory of a great assassin? Laala's story isn't over yet, and surprises still lie ahead. In September 2012, a cold bullet ended the life of the cocaine queen Grisel Blanco, the woman who built one of the most brutal drug cartels in history. As the queen of cocaine, she instilled fear not only in Miami, but throughout the global underworld. Grisel Blanco, a Colombian drug lord, had entered the drug trade long before the name Pablo Escobar became widely known. While Escobar reigned in the 1980s, Blanco was the queen of the 1970s with a bloodlust unmatched by anyone. During her violent reign, she created numerous enemies in both Colombia and the US. Blanco didn't hesitate to eliminate anyone in her way, orchestrating drive-by shootings, motorcycle assassinations, and even daring attacks on her rivals' homes. She was believed to be responsible for at least 200 murders, with some sources suggesting the number could be as high as 2,000. A former detective once said that people feared her so much that her reputation preceded her wherever she went. She wasn't born for a peaceful life. At just 11 years old, Blanco was accused of kidnapping a boy for ransom, and when the parents didn't pay, she coldly ended his life. The horrors she inflicted on others were a reflection of the trauma she had endured at home. She fled her abusive family and lived on the streets of Medellin, where she learned to survive by stealing and selling herself. The opportunity to turn crime into a bigger operation came when she met Carlos Trujillo, a human smuggler who illegally brought immigrants into the US. They had 3 sons together, but the marriage quickly fell apart, and Blanco ordered Trujillo's murder, making him the first of 3 husbands to die by her hand. Her second husband, Alberto Bravo, introduced her to the world of cocaine. They moved to Queens, New York, where they built a massive drug empire, pushing the Italian mafia out of the market. Here, Blanco earned the name Godmother. She invented incredibly clever ways to transport cocaine. Young, attractive women hiding cocaine in their underwear while boarding planes. This plan worked for a long time, bringing her a huge fortune, but her newfound fame also brought unforeseen dangers. In 1975, Blanco and Bravo were arrested in a major NYPD and DEA operation named Operation Banshee. Before she could be prosecuted, Blanco managed to escape back to Colombia, where she ruthlessly killed her husband, Bravo, in a shootout over missing millions. Having evaded justice, she continued sending cocaine to the US by any means possible. In 1976, she was accused of smuggling cocaine on a ship called Gloria during a commemorative race at the port of New York. She then decided to move to Miami, where she became the queen of cocaine, building a cocaine trafficking empire and distributing drugs nationwide with her cunning. She lived in luxury, owning lavish homes, expensive cars, and even a private jet. Everything seemed to be within her reach. However, while enjoying her opulent lifestyle, she never forgot that she was playing a deadly game in Miami. Formidable rivals like the Medellin cartel were lurking, and it was only a matter of time before a territorial war broke out, turning South Florida into a battleground. On July 11th, 1979, a group of Blanco's gunmen carried out a daring assassination at Crown Liquor Store, shooting a notorious drug dealer. They chased store employees through the mall, creating a chilling scene straight out of a movie. The assassins arrived in an armored delivery truck named Happy Time Complete Supply Party, with steel plates on the sides featuring shooting holes, turning the vehicle into a tool of crime. Blanco's assassinations instilled such terrifying fear even among fellow drug lords. As one expert put it, while other criminals killed for specific purposes, Blanco did the opposite. She'd kill first and then say, "Oh, he was innocent. Too bad, but now he's dead." Jorge Ayala, her most loyal henchman, stated that whenever Blanco ordered an assassination, everyone around was in danger. No one was spared. Neither women nor children could escape her deadly wrath. Blanco's power peaked in the 1980s with a billion-dollar drug empire, smuggling 1,500 kg of cocaine into the U.S. every month. However, law enforcement agencies were constantly tracking her. Eventually, the DEA caught up with her, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 1994, Blanco received a major shock when her most trusted lieutenant, Ayala, betrayed her in a murder case. Ayala had enough evidence to put her in the electric chair, but a scandal disrupted the case, discrediting Ayala. As a result, Blanco avoided the death penalty and only served 6 years in prison. After her release, she was deported back to Colombia, where no one welcomed her. With too many enemies, she had nowhere to hide. On September 3rd, 2012, at the age of 69, Blanco was shot twice in the head outside a butcher shop in Medellin. Her death was executed in the same manner she had used to kill so many others. It remains unclear who ordered the hit. Many suspect drug cartels, while others believe it could have been a relative seeking revenge for one of her victims. Either way, with so many enemies, it is difficult to determine who was truly behind the death of the Queen of Cocaine. The story of Grisel Blanco, one of the most controversial figures in drug trafficking history, is not just a tragedy, but a grim reminder of the brutality and dangers of the underworld. On January 11th, 2020, what should have been the happiest day in Karim Lisbeth Yepes Ortiz's life turned into an unimaginable nightmare. As she exchanged vows with her infamous drug lord husband El Calamardo, no one expected their happiness to be shattered by violence. In the middle of their romantic ceremony, a group of armed men stormed the church, bringing death and chaos. The scene turned into utter mayhem as Karim collapsed to the ground in agonizing despair, severely wounded while her husband was dragged away by the attackers amidst the panicked crowd. El Calamardo was not only known as a drug lord, but was also the cause of a brutal war between criminal organizations in Mexico. Karim, the sister of another notorious drug lord, belonged to a family deeply involved in conflicts with the CJNG, Mexico's most powerful and ruthless crime syndicate. This savage assassination shocked the nation, even one so accustomed to violence beyond tolerance. Wedding guests fled in terror, leaving behind dead bodies and chaos. The CJNG killers, dressed in body armor, bearing their infamous logo, showed no mercy. They shot anyone in their way, even killing an innocent boy on a motorcycle outside the church. A barbaric act that sent shivers across the country. The mastermind behind this bloody attack was none other than El Blanco, a dangerous enemy embroiled in a brutal war with Karim's brother, Jose Antonio Yepes Ortiz, also known as El Maro. El Maro was the leader of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, a gang specialized in stealing fuel from pipelines in Guanajuato. The war between these two groups began when a banner appeared in Guanajuato, threatening the president of Mexico that more bloodshed would occur if security forces were not withdrawn from the state. The banner was signed by the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, but El Maro quickly denied responsibility, accusing El Mencho of setting a trap for him. Clearly, El Mencho did not take kindly to having his name mentioned and was determined to wipe out El Maro's gang, seizing the territory he coveted. This wedding massacre was a powerful message sent to El Maro, who had left his sister in a horrific situation. After the incident, CJNG continuously released videos mocking El Maro for his cowardice, which left him feeling humiliated and terrified. Since then, El Maro has gone into hiding, and no one knows his whereabouts. Those who once knew him doubt he will ever resurface. Not much can be expected from someone who fled to save his life, abandoning his own sister in the midst of such a storm of violence and death. The story of Karim and El Mencho has only just begun, but the tension and drama of the fierce war between these underground forces are already palpable, where blood and tears never cease to flow. Jocelyn Alejandra Nino, nicknamed La Flaca, stood in front of the camera with a sweet smile, holding a gun and wearing a bulletproof vest. However, that smile was just a mask hiding the dark world she was about to face. When her photo suddenly went viral on social media, her identity was exposed and a nightmare began. La Flaca, meaning the skinny girl in Spanish, was a name given to her by the Gulf Cartel due to her slender but mysterious figure. This nickname also had connections to Nuestra Señora de la Santa Muerte, the skeletal saint revered in the drug trafficking world. But the name Flaca carried not only gentleness, but also the mark of a curse. Two other female assassins who bore this name had met tragic and striking fear into those who knew it. In the criminal world of Mexico, women like Jocelyn are often recruited by gangs, not only for their alluring appearance, but also for their hidden potential. They often start with menial tasks like guarding or prostitution, but sooner or later, they become ruthless killers. On January 5th, 2015, Jocelyn's fate was sealed. An anonymous user leaked her smiling photo to the citizen-run news site Valorpor, Tamaulipas, known for reporting on security and crime. The photo quickly became the center of attention on Facebook and Twitter, exposing Jocelyn as an assassin for the Gulf Cartel operating in Valorpor, Tamaulipas. She appeared innocent, but the gun in her hand said otherwise. The investigation swiftly revealed that the leak originated from Los Metros, a rival gang fighting for control. Their goal was to weaken Los Ciclones, the group Jocelyn belonged to, making her a target for subsequent attacks. Jocelyn, one of the protectors of her group, knew that her mission would become even more dangerous as Los Metros controlled most of the area. On April 12, 2015, Jocelyn and two other members of Los Ciclones were captured by Los Metros. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next day, Mexican authorities in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, discovered a horrifying scene. Jocelyn's dismembered body stuffed in a cooler in the parking lot of a soda shop. Her remains were found in plastic bags, but she wasn't alone. The bodies of another woman and a man were also dismembered, showing clear signs of torture, likely used to extract information from the unfortunate victims. The only way authorities could identify Jocelyn was through the Nino tattoo on her forearm. The brutality of Los Metros didn't stop there. They boasted about their gruesome spoils on Twitter, posting images of the dismembered bodies as a threatening message to Jocelyn's group. One of the pictures showed Jocelyn bruised, lying beside two other victims before they were dismembered. Another photo displayed her body parts stuffed into a cooler next to the other corpses. Los Metros sent a chilling warning to Los Ciclones with a brutal message. This is the fate of all the scum who support Los Ciclones. This warning not only insulted her group, but also threatened a bloodbath if they dared to trespass on their territory. But the most intriguing part is that Jocelyn wasn't just any assassin. With her strength and determination, she had become a drug queen, crossing many lines and creating numerous enemies, even within the police force. Now those enemies weren't only seeking to eliminate her, but also to destroy everything she had built. Beneath her sweet smile, the truth behind La Flaca was a never-ending battle, where lives were threatened with every passing moment. On January 10th, 2020, a horrifying video shook the internet. Footage of a woman bleeding heavily and gasping for air. That woman was none other than Maria Guadalupe Lopez Esquivel, known as La Katrina, a notorious assassin of the CJNG cartel. Her tragic fate was captured in one haunting final moment, when Mexican authorities stormed a safe house where she was hiding with other gunmen. A life-or-death shootout ensued. Footage from the raid showed La Katrina gravely wounded, collapsing behind a wall, her face and clothes stained with blood. In a desperate moment, she reached toward the camera, as if pleading for a life slipping away from her grasp. Flashback to October 14th, 2019, when La Katrina led a group of gunmen in a fierce attack on police officers in a town near Aguililla. The officers had no idea they were walking into a deadly trap set by her. The grisly scene after the attack showed many police officers lying motionless while their vehicles were riddled with bullets from heavy weapons. This attack left at least 9 officers injured, while La Katrina and her accomplices quickly fled. They left behind a banner with 2 messages, one claiming responsibility for the massacre and another threatening officers collaborating with rival cartels. But everything took a turn on January 10th. According to local media, someone tipped off authorities about La Katrina's presence in the safe house. Police immediately launched a raid, and during the intense gunfight, La Katrina was shot in the neck. The footage from the raid painted a chilling picture. La Katrina lying on the ground, writhing in pain, fighting for her life. An officer tried to comfort her. "Calm down, girl. The helicopter is coming. It's coming now. Easy, easy. You'll be okay. Hang in there." But that comfort seemed meaningless in the face of death. Meanwhile, other members of CJNG tried to block authorities from retreating, forcing the military to call for helicopter support. Another video showed a soldier carrying La Katrina kneeling on the ground before placing her in the waiting helicopter. But it was too late. She passed away just minutes after the helicopter took off. So how did a young assassin like La Katrina end up in such a tragic situation? The name La Katrina comes from the skeletal figure symbolizing Mexico's Day of the Dead, and she was a high-ranking member of the CJNG cartel. In 2017, she left her hometown of Topolcatepec and met Miguel LM2 Fernandez, one of the cartel's leaders. She fell in love with him, joined the gang, and quickly rose through the ranks under his guidance, living a luxurious life in the criminal world. However, as is often the case in the dangerous underworld of cartel gangs, that glamorous life didn't last long. La Katrina was only 21 years old when she met her painful death. A tragic end to a life woven with dreams and ambition, but cut short by inevitable violence. Her life wasn't just a personal tragedy, but a grim reflection of Mexico's drug war, where dreams are buried beneath rivers of blood.
In July 2011, all of Mexico was engulfed in shock and horror when a chilling video surfaced showing Felix Games Garcia and his uncle Barnabas Games being dismembered with a chainsaw. The brutality of notorious drug cartels had crossed all limits, from executions to burning victims alive, leaving the entire nation shuddering. The story began on January 22, 2009, when one of Mexico's most wanted criminals, Santiago Mesa Lopez, was captured by the Mexican army at a house in the Baja Seasons neighborhood of Tijuana. He had been partying for several days, unaware that death awaited him. His nickname, El Pozolero, means the stew maker, a name that refers to the cruel methods he employed. Santiago became infamous for dissolving over 300 bodies in acid at his farm in Ensenada, 70 miles south of the border. He was one of the pioneers in employing the brutal execution method known as El Giso. The El Giso method is simple yet extremely horrifying. The victim is stuffed into a large drum, which is then filled with gasoline or acid and ignited, turning the drum into an incinerator. Who invented this technique remains a mystery, but some Mexican cartels have become notorious for this savage form of execution. To carry it out, a large drum is filled with water and concentrated sulfuric acid, creating boiling waves and spewing hot liquid. Once the mixture is ready, the victim is submerged while still breathing, enduring indescribable pain. Santiago Mesa Lopez was born into a poor family in Sinaloa in April 1964, and he struggled with life from a very young age. At 13, he worked as a construction worker, and by the 1990s, he decided to move to Tijuana in search of new opportunities. However, when his sister was raped by members of a criminal organization, Santiago had no choice but to seek revenge. He joined the Tijuana cartel through a childhood friend, El Teo. As time passed, Santiago quickly climbed the ranks of the cartel, and his determination and brutality caught the attention of the kingpin Efrain Perez. One fateful day, Perez assigned him the horrific task of handling corpses with a salary of $600 per week. From then on, Santiago's life entered a bloody chapter. He began liquefying bodies using a highly unique method, submerging corpses in acid. The bodies were placed in a tank filled with acid and sodium hydroxide, stirred well, and heated to high temperatures for at least 8 hours until they completely dissolved. However, some parts such as teeth, nails, and small bone fragments could not dissolve, and Santiago would discard them in a wasteland, burn them with gasoline, and bury them. After his arrest, Santiago confessed to his crimes, stating that he had handled over 300 bodies by stuffing them into a container of alkaline solution. What remained was dumped into a pit in the eastern hills of Tijuana. Investigators discovered approximately 14,000 body fragments buried on his farm, a horrifying testament to the brutality of drug cartels in Mexico. The story of Santiago is not only a lesson in misery, but also a wake-up call for society regarding the barbaric crimes occurring in the shadows. The name of this extremely violent execution method becomes all the more terrifying when understood as focusing on cooking the victim. Reports from interrogations reveal that Santiago, who committed these savage crimes, attempted to escape from his former boss, Efrain Perez, a former member of the Arellano Felix cartel, also known as the Tijuana cartel. Despite all his efforts to escape control, Santiago failed. He confessed that he was recruited into the cartel while working on a farm in 1996, where senior members of the Arellano Felix cartel forced him to participate in a horrific experiment with water and acid in a barrel. He had no choice but to comply under the threat of violence. The truth of this claim remains unknown, but the fact is that Santiago carried out these barbaric acts for years until he was finally captured in 2012. Initially, he was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, with the possibility of release in April 2022, which outraged many families in Tijuana. However, on February 5, 2024, his sentence was increased by an additional 30 years, bringing him back to his nightmares. The Giso Method became a favorite tool of cartel leaders to eliminate enemies and traitors. The brutality and effectiveness of this method are unimaginable, with victims bound hand and foot, waiting to be stuffed into a barrel of oil while still conscious, feeling every horrifying second. The terrifying legacy of this method serves as a stark reminder of the cruelty within the world of organized crime. The cartels didn't just torture but killed their victims in the most savage ways. There were even times when they threw victims, either alive or dead, to the cartel's tigers belonging to Los Chapitos. Since the 1980s, rare and dangerous animals have been used as symbols of immense wealth. Over the years, cartel bosses have followed a different crazy tradition. Much like Pablo Escobar, who kept hippos and other exotic animals at his estate, rare and dangerous pets remain a status symbol among the higher-ups in Mexican cartels, a way to display power and send threatening messages, as if the more dangerous their pet, the more terrifying they are. Mexican authorities later pointed out that these animals weren't just for show. Sometimes cartels would throw unfortunate victims into cages where hungry predators were kept. In some of the most brutal forms of torture, victims would beg for their lives just moments before being torn apart by wild beasts. One of the cartel bosses who employed this form of torture was Herberto Lascano, who was born into poverty on Christmas Day. In December 1974 in Hidalgo, Mexico, Herberto joined the army at the age of 17, serving in the elite special forces that fought drug organizations and insurgents. After 7 years of service, on March 27, 1998, he deserted and joined Los Zetas under the recruitment of Osiel Cardenas Guillen and Arturo Guzman de Chena. The nickname Z3 became one of the most feared names in the modern world of crime. According to authorities, Herberto was a master at torturing his victims with one of his infamous methods called La Palera. Victims would be stripped naked and brutally tortured with a board. There are reports that Herberto once tied a man to a tree, beat him so badly that his legs broke and left the victim to suffer, dying slowly tied to the tree over the course of 3 days. These horrifying images still haunt the minds of those who witnessed them, serving as proof of the ruthlessness in a world where compassion had been utterly trampled. Herberto was not only notorious for his crimes, but also for owning a farm where he kept lions and tigers, using them in grotesquely cruel acts. He frequently threw victims into animal cages, keeping the animals starved so they were ready to tear apart their prey when it was time to feast. These deadly fights were not only a way to settle matters, but also became a form of entertainment for him. Herberto was obsessed with watching his pets tear apart victims, deriving satisfaction from the pain they inflicted. He laughed, savoring every moment of torture and even broadcasted these gruesome acts to an audience. Unfortunately, he never had to experience the pain he caused. In 2012, Herberto was shot dead in a gunfight with the Mexican army, ending the life of a ruthless man. In the summer of 2018, a horrifying video surfaced online, shaking all of Mexico. The footage shot on La Union Hill near the Costa Grande and Tierra Caliente border captured the moment a father and son were killed by members of a drug cartel. The two men were tightly bound, kneeling on the ground, mouths gagged, hands tied. The captors interrogated the father, beating him brutally with a large wooden stick in unimaginable cruelty. The most horrifying moment came when the father was beheaded in front of his son with a small knife resembling a pen. This scene shocked the entire nation, but what broke people's hearts the most was the son's reaction. The tears and shock of the boy moved the hearts of the entire country, as the father seemed to have accepted his tragic fate, perhaps after enduring many beatings or becoming paralyzed with terror. After killing the father, the captors relentlessly tortured the son in an even more brutal manner. They slashed his chest with a knife while he was still conscious, although repeatedly slipping into a state of shock. This video highlighted the cruelty of the cartels, who were willing to do anything to maintain power and control. In 2010, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a notorious drug lord, caused a public outcry when he released a video showing him using fire as a method of torture on a member of a rival cartel. The victim, Hugo Hernandez, was skinned with a chainsaw, after which El Chapo ordered his men to sew the victim's skin into a ball as a cold warning to the Wars cartel. Hernandez's body was found in a plastic bin, while the rest of him was dumped on the streets of Los Mochis as a terrifying threat. The cartels had honed their torture skills to a frightening degree, using sharp knives to carefully skin victims or tear their faces apart amidst their blood-curdling screams. In this barbaric practice, the killers didn't just want to kill, but wanted to make the victims live long enough to endure prolonged pain. They often targeted the most serious criminals, such as members of rival gangs, double agents, and thieves. The brutality of skinning a person made it clear that these people were not playing games. They could inflict such horrifying pain while the victim screamed, begging for mercy, far beyond what anyone could imagine. Dermatologists have noted that death from skinning usually occurs due to shock, severe blood loss, or infection. They estimate that actual death takes place a few hours to several days after being skinned. If this isn't the most tragic death, it's hard to imagine what would be. In 2015, Texas police arrested Marciano Chano Milan Vasquez, a gunman for the Los Zetas cartel, in connection with the kidnapping of an accomplice in a drug deal in 2013. The accomplice, who was testifying against Vasquez, recounted that the gunman took him to a secret location where Vasquez was holding a family of 3. When Vasquez removed the blindfold, the accomplice saw a couple and their daughter standing near a fire pit, witnessing Vasquez chop off the daughter's limbs with an axe. These gruesome images are not just a haunting memory, but also evidence of the limitless brutality of the criminal world. It wasn't just Vasquez. Other cartel members participated in these brutal executions, injecting victims with morphine, adrenaline, or heroin. These substances affected the central nervous system, keeping the victims conscious throughout the horrifying torture process. The executioners then used sharp blades, even surgical knives, to completely sever the limbs of their victims. Their goal was to prolong the victim's suffering, so they would avoid cutting near vital organs. The combination of blood loss, infection, and shock from extreme pain created a perfect cocktail of torture, leaving the victims barely alive. These unfortunate souls had no choice but to provide the information they were withholding, but often the price of survival was death by excruciating pain. This is how the cartel killed 2 birds with 1 stone, to ensuring the victim's slow and painful death while making it easier to dispose of the body. In many cases, body parts would be left in public places as a warning to anyone who dared to oppose them. A famous example of this brutality occurred in October 2010, when Israel Rincon, a gang member, was not only killed, but dismembered for having killed the son of one of El Chapo's allies. When El Chapo caught him, he tortured him until he passed out, but kept a doctor nearby to ensure he didn't die too quickly. El Chapo's loyalists took turns subjecting him to various forms of cruelty, ultimately leading to his limbs being severed. His body was then discarded in the city of Culiacan, Mexico, as a chilling message. In 2011, another horrifying execution took place when Felix Games Garcia and his uncle, Barnabas Games, were brutally beheaded. This was one of the cartel's first executions to be filmed and distributed worldwide. In the video, a man wearing a ski mask holds a chainsaw, adjusts the blade to the victim's neck, and anyone watching could easily guess what was about to happen. These men worked for the notorious Cali cartel and made the fatal mistake of stealing from the drug lords, paying for it with their lives. In August 2008, cartel leader Moises Escamilla May was arrested shortly after being accused of beheading 12 people in Yucatan, Mexico. This was just one of the countless crimes this cartel had committed. It's widely known that getting involved with Mexico's cartels is like signing your own death warrant. Movies portraying the lives of these criminals may seem captivating, but reality is far more brutal. In today's digital age, the cartels don't just commit murders, but also film them and publicly distribute the videos, sending messages to rival gangs or the authorities. In September 2011, Mexican police discovered 5 decaying heads in a bag outside an elementary school in Acapulco. Dozens of schools went on strike due to security concerns, as violence in the area escalated. 11 years later, at the other end of the country, 5 more severed heads were found in a cooler in Tamaulipas. These tactics have not been limited to a few cartels or regions, but have spread across Mexico over the years. They don't just behead rival gang members, but also target journalists who have criticized their operations, sending a clear message to anyone daring to speak out against them. Some beheadings have even been carried out in ritualistic fashion, tied to the cartel's belief systems as a way to fulfill religious or spiritual demands. This brutality not only highlights the cold-hearted nature of the criminal world, but also shows the dehumanization in the battle for power and survival. In the violent underworld of drug cartels, cannibalism has become a grotesque open secret in recent years. The CJNG, under the leadership of El Mencho, has dominated the headlines with accusations of such horrific behavior. They have quickly risen to become one of the most dominant cartels in Mexico, expanding their operations to at least 35 states nationwide and even into Puerto Rico. To maintain dominance, the cartels require their new members to endure extreme psychological violence. They must suppress any empathy towards those they kill and forget their own humanity. As a result, the use of human flesh as a form of training has become common, aimed at desensitizing them to violence and fostering a fearless spirit. These horrific public displays not only serve to intimidate rival gangs, but also demonstrate the gang's power. Members are taught how to cut off fingers and toes, one of their preferred methods of torture during interrogations. During training, they are forced to eat the severed fingers, and if anyone vomits, the discarded body parts are retrieved, and they are made to eat them again. Even more horrifying, new members are required to sleep next to corpses at night to become accustomed to death and create a warped sense of loyalty to the gang. A prime example of this cruelty is Miguel Trevino Morales, also known as Z40, the former leader of the Zetas cartel, who had a gruesome habit of eating his victims' hearts as a spiritual ritual to seek invulnerability from his enemies. He did not just commit these acts himself, but also forced other victims to participate, creating an atmosphere of terror. Psychological warfare wasn't just about gathering information, but was also aimed at terrorizing and instilling fear in others, preventing them from defying the cartel. The cartels know that most people will say anything just to relieve the pain. They also employed mad psychological torture, confining victims in cramped rooms with limited food and water, leaving them to live in utter fear. Over time, victims faced prolonged isolation, terrifying sounds and sights, and even staged executions designed to break them down physically and mentally. For the slightest reasons, some victims might lose a finger, and eventually, they might have no fingers left. The cruelty of these gangs knows no limits. Sometimes they slowly mutilate their victims, applying any gruesome methods of torture they can think of. This terrifying power is necessary to maintain their position in the chain of power. One of the scariest aspects of the Mexican cartels is that they don't just terrorize the public and their rivals, but sometimes even target innocent people. Former Mayor Maria Santos Gorostieta Salazar is a prime example. In November 2012, Maria was kidnapped by the Knights Templar cartel and forced to watch as her husband was burned alive with a blowtorch, an unimaginable scene. These actions not only show the gang's brutality, but also illustrate the price that innocent people pay in the war between criminal forces. Afterward, she could hardly believe her eyes as she witnessed the murderer kill 4 more victims in a similarly brutal fashion. The desperate screams echoed in the night, but no one dared to speak out. In the end, he turned towards her, and before she could comprehend what was happening, she became the next victim. He and his accomplices raped her before deciding to end her life. A later autopsy report showed that she had died from severe head trauma. Mexican cartels have combined extreme violence with psychological manipulation to control their victims, turning their brutal murders into a terrifying warning to anyone who dares oppose them. On February 12, 2019, during El Chapo's famous public trial, many of the Cali cartel's torture methods were exposed, most notably water torture. This is an insane form of punishment that involves pouring water over a cloth placed on the victim's face, making it impossible for them to breathe. Water torture has existed for centuries, from the time of the Spanish Empire to World War II, but now the cartels have added a deadly twist to this method. This torture technique not only creates the sensation of drowning, but also inflicts extreme pain on the victim. It damages the lungs and brain, leading to oxygen deprivation and psychological trauma. Mexican criminal gangs are infamous for their brutal executions of those who stand in their way, and the use of this method truly puts victims through an unimaginable level of terror. Guanaza is essentially water torture, but instead of regular water, the cartels use carbonated water and sometimes even mix it with chili. They pour the water into the victim's nose, making the suffocation sensation even more unbearable. The heavier the cloth placed over the victim's face, the longer the death is prolonged, and the more intense the torture becomes. The cartels pour the water intermittently for as long as possible. If the liquid is poured continuously, it can lead to death, making this a form of torture that exceeds the limits of imagination. In 2016, Mexican authorities discovered a body hanging from a bridge in Tijuana, just 10 meters from the U.S. border. The San Diego Union Tribune reported that from January to October 2018, drug trafficking had led to the deaths of more than 1,250 people in Tijuana. To illustrate the horror of the situation, in November 2021, police pulled down 9 bodies from a bridge in Zacatecas, left as a warning between rival gangs. This was an act of revenge for the dismemberment of 14 men, possibly from the Los Zetas group, who were found in a minivan in Nuevo Laredo. The bodies had been hanging since about 6 a.m. and remained there for around 4 hours before police arrived. Hanging bodies in public sends a message of territorial control in disputed areas. These victims are often mutilated, abused, and simply hung up with signs for everyone to see. This brutality is not just unique to the cartels, as these methods originated in Europe about 500 years ago, and even the Taliban has used them. For the Mexican cartels, hanging a rival in public is not just an act of cowardice, but a clear message of power in contested cities, forcing people to live in extreme fear. But to the cartels, this does not matter. The more bodies they hang, the more they demonstrate their terrifying power. These victims are usually members of rival gangs or unfortunate individuals who have been kidnapped. This brutal execution is a clear message of power. Who truly rules this territory? According to data from the Mexican government, at least 60,000 people have disappeared since 2006, but a 2015 report recorded only 6 federal criminal convictions for kidnapping. The main reason for these disappearances lies in the Cartel Kitchens, notorious and chilling locations where bloody torture and executions take place. Once you step inside, The horrifying image will never leave your mind. Blood-stained handprints on the walls, blood-soaked clothes, plastic ties, and machetes strewn around. A witness to this scene described the gruesome sound of bones cracking under a thick layer of ash. This is what happens at La Gaya Ranch in northern Veracruz, which has been taken over by the Los Zetas cartel. Since the gang took control in 2011, the ranch has become a site for cremating their victims. Their idea is simple. Instead of killing a target and leaving the cold body on the street, they track, kidnap, and bring the victim to one of their 12 kitchens. Here, the victim is tortured and interrogated for valuable information before being killed and cooked. It is estimated that over 60,000 people have fallen victim to cartel kitchens in Mexico alone. These disappearances happen for various reasons, such as kidnapping for sexual slavery, organ harvesting, forced labor, ransom demands, and even the suppression of political activists and journalists. Mexican authorities have had to sift through millions of bone fragments, teeth, fingernails, and other remains in the hope of identifying hundreds of victims who were tortured in these kitchens. Anyone who ends up in one of these places faces an extreme form of psychological torture. First, they witness horrifying scenes and hear the desperate screams of other victims, which is enough to break even the strongest hearts before the true terror begins. Families are extremely anxious and frustrated knowing that the kitchen at this ranch was not a recent discovery. Since 2017, they have had to repeatedly pressure the authorities to search this place, and each time more things that were missed in previous searches were found. 6 femurs, pelvic bones, jaw bones, and hundreds of other bone fragments, many of which had been burned, were discovered in separate sweeps. If one of your loved ones were taken to these kitchens, how would you feel about your government? In this brutal society, fear is ever present, and hope remains only a faint memory in the darkness. How does this story make you feel? Please share your thoughts in the comments below for everyone to see. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.